I'm Emma, 28, and I thought I knew exactly how worthless my parents considered me until the day they literally threw me out of their house with nothing but a suitcase and demanded I leave the key behind. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a call from First National Bank that would make their power play the most expensive mistake of their lives. The house they were so smugly kicking me out of? The one they'd been living in rent-free for 2 years while treating me like hired help. Well, let's just say the mortgage documents in my name were about to make this family drama legendary. Before we dive into this revenge story that'll make you question everything about family loyalty, I'm dying to know, what do you think my parents' faces looked like when they realized who actually owned the roof over their heads? Drop your wildest predictions in the comments. If you love stories where entitled parents get exactly what they deserve, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this tale of family betrayal and ultimate justice is about to get absolutely insane. Trust me, the karma in this story hits harder than a wrecking ball. Growing up in the Rodriguez household meant understanding your place in the family hierarchy from day one. My older brother Jake was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, whose every achievement was celebrated like a national holiday, whose failures were explained away as temporary setbacks. I was the perpetual disappointment, the daughter who somehow never measured up to their impossibly high standards, no matter what I accomplished. Jake sailed through high school as the star quarterback, earned a partial scholarship to State University, and graduated with a business degree that my parents treated like it was from Harvard. Never mind that his GPA was barely above passing or that he'd switched majors 3 times. In their eyes, Jake was destined for greatness, the son who would carry on the family name and make them proud in their retirement years. Meanwhile, I was quietly earning straight A's, working part-time jobs to pay for my own expenses, and building a career in digital marketing that actually generated substantial income. But because I was a daughter, because I chose a career they didn't understand, and because I refused to follow their traditional expectations about marriage and children, nothing I did seemed to matter. The double standard was staggering and constant. When Jake lost his 3rd job in 2 years due to personality conflicts with management, which was code for showing up late and arguing with supervisors, my parents rallied around him with support and encouragement. When I got promoted to senior marketing manager at 26, making more money than Jake had ever seen, my mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Now when are you going to find a nice man and give us grandchildren?" 2 years ago, when Jake's latest business venture, a food truck that served gourmet hot dogs, failed spectacularly, leaving him $50,000 in debt and facing eviction from his apartment, my parents didn't hesitate to welcome him back home. They cleared out the guest room, stocked the refrigerator with his favorite foods, and assured him that family always had a place to land when times got tough. I'd been living in a successful apartment complex across town, building my career and maintaining my independence. But when the lease came up for renewal and the rent increased significantly, I made what I thought was a temporary decision to move back home and save money for a house down payment. My parents agreed, with the understanding that it would be a short-term arrangement while I got my finances in order. What I didn't anticipate was how differently I would be treated compared to Jake's homecoming. While he was welcomed as the prodigal son returning home, I was treated like a paying boarder who should be grateful for the privilege of occupying space in their house. My parents charged me $800 monthly for rent, plus utilities, plus groceries, plus a share of household maintenance costs. Jake, meanwhile, contributed nothing financially while pursuing his latest get-rich-quick scheme involving cryptocurrency trading that he learned about from YouTube videos. The household dynamics were toxic from the start. I was expected to maintain my childhood chores, cleaning bathrooms, doing laundry, grocery shopping, while also paying rent and working full-time. Jake slept until noon, left dirty dishes in the sink, and treated the house like a hotel where housekeeping was included in the service. When I complained about the unfair arrangement, my mother would sigh and say, "Emma, Jake is going through a difficult transition. You have a steady job and can handle more responsibility." The breaking point should have been when Jake brought home his girlfriend Melissa, a 22-year-old who treated my parents' house like her personal vacation rental. She moved into Jake's room without discussion, contributed nothing to household expenses, and somehow made even more mess than Jake did. Now I was subsidizing not just my brother's freeloading lifestyle, but his girlfriend's as well. But what really pushed me over the edge was the constant criticism disguised as concern. Every morning over coffee, my parents would find new ways to express their disappointment in my life choices. Why wasn't I married yet? Why didn't I want children? Why was I wasting my life on computer work instead of finding a real career? Meanwhile, Jake's day trading losses were discussed in hushed, sympathetic tones as learning experiences and building character. The final straw came 3 months ago during a family dinner when my mother announced that Jake and Melissa were getting engaged. The celebration was immediate and overwhelming. Champagne appeared, plans for engagement parties were discussed, and my father started talking about wedding costs as if money was no object. Later that same evening, when I mentioned that I was considering buying a house and might need to borrow some money for closing costs, my father laughed and said, "Emma, you need to be more realistic about your financial situation. Home ownership is a big responsibility that requires stability." The irony was crushing. Jake, who had never held a job for more than 18 months and was currently living rent-free in our parents' house while losing money day trading, was being celebrated for his engagement and treated like a responsible adult ready for marriage. I, who had been steadily employed for 6 years, had excellent credit, and had saved a substantial down payment, was being lectured about financial responsibility. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, the same room I'd had as a teenager, complete with faded boy band posters and a twin bed that made me feel like I was regressing instead of progressing in life, and realized that nothing I ever accomplished would be enough for my parents. The problem wasn't my achievements or my character or my life choices. The problem was that I would never be Jake, and in their eyes, that made me a perpetual disappointment. What I didn't know at the time was that my great-aunt Sophia, my grandmother's sister who had moved to California decades ago and maintained minimal contact with the family, had been quietly watching my life unfold through social media and occasional phone calls with my grandmother before she passed. Aunt Sophia had never married, had built a successful real estate empire, and had strong opinions about family dynamics and gender expectations. The phone call that would change everything came 3 weeks before my parents decided to kick me out of their house. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, you need to understand exactly how spectacular their power play was, and why it backfired in the most satisfying way possible. The morning that would change my family dynamic forever started like any other Tuesday in the Rodriguez household. I was in the kitchen making coffee before work, listening to Jake and Melissa argue about whose turn it was to walk their newly adopted puppy. A responsibility that somehow always fell to me despite having no say in getting the dog. My parents were at the breakfast table, reviewing bills with the kind of serious expressions they reserved for discussions about money and Jake's future. "Emma, we need to talk," my father announced as I poured my coffee, using the tone he'd perfected for delivering disappointing news about my life choices. "Your mother and I have been discussing the living situation, and we've decided it's time for you to move out." I set down my coffee mug, thinking this was another one of their passive-aggressive hints about finding my own place. "Okay, I've been looking at apartments. I can probably find something within the next month or two if—" "No," my mother interrupted, her voice sharp with finality. "We mean today. This morning. Jake and Melissa need more space, and this arrangement isn't working out for the family." The words hit me like a physical blow. After 2 years of paying rent, handling household responsibilities, and subsidizing my brother's lifestyle, they were evicting me with no notice to make room for his unemployed girlfriend. "Today? Mom, I can't find an apartment in one morning. I need time to." "You're 28 years old, Emma. It's time you learned to handle your own problems without depending on family support," my father said, as if I hadn't been financially supporting myself since college while Jake lived rent-free. We've enabled your dependence long enough. Jake chose that moment to wander into the kitchen, wearing boxers and yesterday's t-shirt, completely oblivious to the family crisis unfolding around his convenience. "What's everyone talking about?" he asked, opening the refrigerator and pulling out leftover pizza for breakfast. "We're helping Emma transition to independence," my mother explained, using the kind of tone usually reserved for discussing charitable work. "It's time she learned to stand on her own 2 feet." The hypocrisy was so blatant that I almost laughed. Jake was standing right there, eating food he didn't pay for, in a house where he contributed nothing, while they lectured me about independence. "Are you serious right now? I've been paying rent, buying groceries, cleaning this house, and working full-time while Jake hasn't contributed a penny in 2 years." "Jake is building his business," my mother replied defensively. "His cryptocurrency investments are showing real promise, and we believe in supporting family during transitional periods." "His cryptocurrency investments have lost $3,000 in the past month alone." I shot back, my voice rising with frustration. "He's not building anything, he's gambling with money he doesn't have while living off your support." "That's enough," my father snapped, standing up from the table with the kind of authority he'd used when I was a misbehaving teenager. "Your attitude is exactly why this arrangement isn't working. Jake appreciates what we're doing for him. You just complain and make demands." The accusation was so unfair that I felt tears of rage threatening to spill over. For 2 years, I'd swallowed my pride, paid their unreasonable fees, and maintained my childhood role as the responsible daughter who handled problems without complaint. The one time I pointed out the obvious unfairness of their treatment, I was labeled as ungrateful and demanding. "I want you packed and out of here by noon," my mother continued, her voice taking on that cold, dismissive tone she'd perfected for dealing with disappointments. "Leave your key on the kitchen counter, and make sure you take everything that belongs to you. We don't want any reason for you to keep coming back." Melissa appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing one of Jake's shirts and looking like she'd just rolled out of bed. "Oh, is Emma finally moving out? That's great. I was hoping we could turn her room into a home office for Jake's trading business." She said this with the kind of casual entitlement that made my blood boil, as if my displacement was a minor inconvenience that would benefit her decorating plans. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart," my mother said, smiling at Melissa with the warmth she'd never shown me. "Jake will need a proper space for his business activities." I stared at my family, really looked at them, and realized that this wasn't a rash decision made in anger. This was a calculated move they'd been planning, probably for weeks. They'd decided that Jake's comfort and Melissa's desires were more important than their daughter's housing security, and they'd chosen the cruelest possible way to execute their plan. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll be out by noon." The next 4 hours were a blur of packing boxes, loading my car, and systematically removing every trace of my presence from the house I'd called home for 2 years. My parents made no effort to help, instead hovering nearby to ensure I wasn't taking anything that didn't belong to me. Jake and Melissa disappeared to avoid the awkwardness, probably planning how to redecorate my room before I'd even finished loading my car. The most humiliating moment came when I was carrying my last box to the car and my mother called out, "Emma, your key." I set the box down and walked back to the kitchen, placing my house key on the counter with shaking hands. "Thank you," she said with the politeness she'd use with a departing house guest. "We hope you understand that this is for the best." As I drove away from the house I'd grown up in, with all my possessions crammed into my Honda Civic and no idea where I was going to sleep that night, I felt a mixture of rage, heartbreak, and something else, relief. For the first time in years, I was free from the constant weight of their disapproval and the exhausting effort of trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. What my parents didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone because I was still processing the implications myself, was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a phone call that changed my entire financial situation. Great-Aunt Sophia, the family member who'd moved to California before I was born and whom I'd met only a handful of times, had passed away at 89 and left me her entire estate. The inheritance was substantial, more substantial than anything the Rodriguez family had ever imagined. Along with investment accounts and real estate holdings worth several $1,000,000, there was one particular asset that was about to make my parents' eviction the most expensive mistake of their lives. The house they'd just kicked me out of, the house they'd been living in for over a decade and treating as their personal kingdom. The house where Jake was planning to set up his trading office and Melissa was already planning to redecorate. They didn't own it. I did. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been sitting in my childhood bedroom, trying to concentrate on a client presentation while Jake's music thumped through the thin walls, when my phone rang with a California number I didn't recognize. Normally I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Emma Rodriguez?" The voice belonged to an older man with a professional tone that immediately put me on alert. "Yes, this is Emma. Who's calling?" "My name is David Chen, and I'm an attorney with Chen, Martinez and Associates in Sacramento. I'm calling about your great-aunt, Sophia Martinez. I'm sorry to inform you that she passed away last week." I felt a jolt of surprise and sadness. Aunt Sophia had been more myth than reality in my family, the mysterious sister who'd left Texas in the 1960s, made a fortune in California real estate, and maintained minimal contact with the Rodriguez family. I'd met her perhaps 3 times at various family funerals and weddings, but she'd always seemed more interested in me than the other relatives. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, wondering why her attorney was calling me directly. "Was there something specific you needed?" "Actually, yes. You've been named as the primary beneficiary in Ms. Martinez's will. She left you her entire estate, including several real estate properties, investment accounts, and other assets." I know this might come as a surprise. The words didn't immediately register. Primary beneficiary? Entire estate? I think there might be some mistake. I barely knew Aunt Sophia. We only met a few times over the years. There's no mistake, Ms. Rodriguez. Your great-aunt was very specific about her intentions. She left detailed notes explaining her decision, and she'd been monitoring your career and personal development through social media and occasional conversations with your late grandmother. She was quite impressed with your work ethic and independence. Mr. Chen went on to explain that Aunt Sophia had built a real estate empire over 5 decades, starting with a small apartment building in Sacramento and eventually owning commercial and residential properties throughout California. She'd never married, had no children, and had grown increasingly disappointed with what she saw as the entitled attitudes of most of her extended family. She specifically mentioned that she wanted her assets to go to someone who would appreciate them and use them responsibly. Based on her notes, she felt you were the only family member who had demonstrated those qualities. The phone call lasted over an hour as Mr. Chen outlined the scope of the inheritance. The numbers were staggering: real estate holdings worth over $8 million, investment accounts totaling $2.3 million, and various other assets including a small but profitable property management company. But the most interesting revelation came near the end of the conversation. "There's one property in particular that Ms. Martinez wanted me to mention specifically," Mr. Chen said. "She purchased a house in Austin, Texas, about 12 years ago as an investment property. The address is 1247 Maple Street. She said you'd understand the significance." My heart stopped. 1247 Maple Street was my parents' address. The house I'd grown up in, the house where I was currently living and paying rent, the house my parents treated as their personal kingdom, it belonged to Aunt Sophia. Which meant it now belonged to me. "Mr. Chen, are you telling me that my great-aunt owned my parents' house?" "According to the property records, yes. She purchased it in 2012 when the previous owner was facing foreclosure. Your parents have been renting it from her property management company ever since, though I don't believe they knew the identity of the actual owner. The implications were mind-boggling. For over a decade, my parents had been paying rent to a property management company, never realizing that the house actually belonged to a family member. They'd been living in Aunt Sophia's house, building no equity, accumulating no wealth, while treating me like I was the one who needed to learn about financial responsibility. There's more, Ms. Rodriguez. According to the rental history, your parents have been chronically late with rent payments for the past 2 years. The property management company has been considering eviction proceedings, but Ms. Martinez instructed them to be patient with family members. Now that you're the owner, those decisions will be up to you. I sat in stunned silence, processing the complete reversal of everything I thought I knew about my family's financial situation. My parents, who had been lecturing me about fiscal responsibility and independence, were actually struggling to pay rent on a house they didn't own. Meanwhile, I had just inherited assets that made me wealthier than everyone in my family combined. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Mr. Chen to understand the full scope of my inheritance and begin the process of transferring ownership. The paperwork was complex, involving multiple properties across different states, but the Texas house was relatively straightforward since it was held in a simple trust. The property management company, Austin Premier Properties, had been handling the rental arrangement with professional discretion. When I contacted them to introduce myself as the new owner, the conversation was illuminating. Ms. Rodriguez, we're so glad to finally speak with you directly, said Jennifer Walsh, the property manager. We've been concerned about the rental situation for some time. Your parents are currently 3 months behind on rent, and we've had to issue several notices about property maintenance issues. 3 months behind on rent. That meant that while they were collecting $800 monthly from me for the privilege of living in their house, they weren't even paying their own housing costs. The money I'd been contributing was probably the only thing keeping them from eviction, and they had no idea how precarious their situation actually was. What kind of maintenance issues? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Primarily neglect of basic upkeep that tenants are responsible for according to the lease agreement. Landscaping has been ignored, there are several needed repairs that haven't been addressed, and we've received complaints from neighbors about the property's appearance. We've sent multiple notices, but they've been largely ignored. The picture became clearer with every detail. My parents had been living in a rental property, falling behind on payments, neglecting maintenance responsibilities, and treating the house like they owned it while charging me rent. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I wouldn't tell my family about the inheritance yet. I wanted to see how far they were willing to push their power play, how cruelly they were willing to treat their daughter while simultaneously depending on her financial contributions to avoid eviction from a house they didn't even own. The irony was too perfect to interrupt. Let them continue their charade of financial superiority and property ownership. Let them keep treating me like the irresponsible child who needed lessons in independence. When the time was right, and I had a feeling I'd know exactly when that moment arrived, I would reveal the truth in the most spectacular way possible. I had no idea that moment would come just 3 weeks later, with a suitcase in my hand and a house key on their kitchen counter. Sitting in a hotel room that evening, staring at my hastily packed belongings and trying to process the events of the day, I made a decision that would change my family's dynamic forever. It was time to contact Austin Premier Properties and inform them that the new owner of 1247 Maple Street had some immediate concerns about the current tenants. The next morning, I called Jennifer Walsh and scheduled a property inspection for that afternoon. I'd like to see the current condition of my property and discuss the rental situation with the tenants, I explained, choosing my words carefully. I believe there have been some ongoing issues that need to be addressed. Absolutely, Ms. Rodriguez. Given the payment delinquencies and maintenance concerns, we've been hoping for more direct owner involvement. What time would work best for you? We arranged to meet at 2 p.m., which would give my parents time to settle into their normal afternoon routines. Jake would likely be day trading from the couch, Melissa would be planning her takeover of my former bedroom, and my parents would be enjoying their newly peaceful house, blissfully unaware that their landlord was about to make a surprise visit. I drove to the house with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, parking across the street to wait for Jennifer's arrival. The property looked exactly as she'd described, landscaping neglected, paint peeling on the front porch, and Jake's car parked on the lawn because he was too lazy to clear the junk out of the garage. For people who charged their daughter rent and lectured about responsibility, they certainly weren't maintaining the property like responsible tenants. Jennifer arrived in a professional sedan, clipboard in hand and camera ready to document the property conditions. She was a woman in her 50s with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd dealt with difficult tenants before. "Ms. Rodriguez? I'm Jennifer Walsh. Are you ready to see your property?" This feels like one of those moments where everything changes, doesn't it? Like when you're watching a movie and you know the protagonist is about to drop the bombshell that flips the entire story upside down. I'm getting chills just thinking about what happened next, and I bet you are too. What do you think went through my parents' minds when they opened that door? Drop your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe because the next few minutes are going to be absolutely epic. Walking up the front steps of the house I'd grown up in, now accompanied by a property manager there to inspect my property, felt surreal. I rang the doorbell, something I'd never had to do in 28 years of living there, and waited for someone to answer. My father opened the door, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to confusion to something approaching panic as he recognized me standing next to a professional-looking woman with a clipboard. "Emma? What are you doing here? I thought we made it clear." "Good afternoon, Mr. Rodriguez," Jennifer interrupted smoothly. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from Austin Premier Properties. This is Emma Rodriguez, the new owner of this property. We're here to conduct a rental inspection and discuss some ongoing concerns about the lease agreement." The color drained from my father's face so quickly that I was genuinely concerned he might faint. He gripped the doorframe for support, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to speak but couldn't form words. Behind him, I could hear my mother calling, "Who's at the door, Roberto?" The owner?" my father stammered, looking back and forth between Jennifer and me like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "What do you mean, owner?" Jennifer consulted her clipboard with professional efficiency. "Ms. Rodriguez inherited this property from her great-aunt, Sofia Martinez, 3 weeks ago. As the new owner, she has concerns about the current tenancy, including 3 months of unpaid rent and maintenance violations." "May we come in?" My mother appeared behind my father, took one look at the scene, and immediately understood that something catastrophic was happening to their worldview. "Emma, what is this woman talking about? What's this nonsense about owning our house?" "It's not your house, Mom," I said quietly, stepping into the foyer I'd been banned from just 24 hours earlier. "It never was. You've been renting it from Aunt Sophia for 12 years, and now you're renting it from me." Jake emerged from the living room, still in yesterday's clothes, carrying a bowl of cereal and looking annoyed at the interruption to his trading activities. Melissa was right behind him, wearing the shirt she'd claimed would be perfect for Jake's new home office. The entire family was now assembled to witness the complete destruction of their reality. "This is ridiculous," my mother said, her voice rising with the kind of hysteria she usually reserved for major family crises. "This house has been in the Rodriguez family for over a decade. We own this house. We have equity in this house. Emma, if this is some kind of joke—" "Ma'am," Jennifer interrupted gently but firmly, "I have the property records right here. This house was purchased by Sofia Martinez in 2012 when the previous owners faced foreclosure. Your family has been tenants since that time, with rent payments handled through our property management company. You've never owned this property." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my family's faces as they processed information that contradicted everything they'd believed about their financial situation and social status. The house they'd used as collateral for their sense of superiority, the property they'd treated as the foundation of their family legacy, was actually a rental they couldn't afford. "But we've been making payments," my father said weakly. "For 12 years, we've been making payments." "Rent payments, sir. Not mortgage payments. And according to our records, you're currently 3 months behind on those rent payments, which puts you in violation of your lease agreement." Jake finally found his voice. "Wait, are you saying Emma owns this house? Like, actually owns it?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, Jake," I replied, feeling a surge of satisfaction at the bewilderment in his voice. "Aunt Sophia left me her entire estate, including this house, several other properties, and enough money to make your cryptocurrency losses look like pocket change." Melissa, who had been planning to redecorate my bedroom just hours earlier, looked like she was attending a funeral. "So when you moved out yesterday?" "When you kicked me out yesterday," I corrected, "you evicted your landlord from the property she owns. The property you can't afford to keep renting, apparently." My mother sank into a chair, her face pale with shock and what looked like the dawning realization of how badly they'd miscalculated. "Emma, if you own this house, then the money you were paying us wasn't rent, Mom. It was me subsidizing your actual rent while you treated me like a burden. I was essentially paying you to live in my own house while you charged me for the privilege." Jennifer, who had been quietly taking notes and photographs throughout this family meltdown, cleared her throat diplomatically. "Ms. Rodriguez, would you like to proceed with the property inspection? I can document the current conditions and we can discuss next steps for the tenancy." The next hour was a masterclass in awkward family dynamics as Jennifer conducted a thorough inspection of the property, noting maintenance issues, documenting damage, and photographing evidence of neglect, all while my family trailed behind us like guilty children following a disappointed parent. The worst discoveries were in Jake's room, where cryptocurrency trading had apparently involved multiple monitors, tangled cables everywhere, and enough energy drink cans to stock a convenience store. The carpet was stained, there were holes in the walls from improperly mounted equipment, and the smell of neglect was overwhelming. "This room will require significant repairs and professional cleaning," Jennifer noted, photographing the damage while Jake stood in the doorway looking mortified. But the most damaging evidence was found in the garage, which had been converted into a storage area for Jake's various failed business ventures. Boxes of unsold merchandise from his hot dog cart, cryptocurrency mining equipment that had never been properly installed, and general household neglect had created a fire hazard that violated multiple safety codes. "This is a serious lease violation," Jennifer explained to my parents, who were following the inspection like prisoners awaiting sentencing. "Storage of commercial equipment in residential spaces without proper permits, fire safety violations, and failure to maintain basic property standards. Combined with the unpaid rent, this gives us grounds for immediate eviction proceedings." The word eviction hit my family like a physical blow. My mother started crying, my father began calculating numbers on his phone, and Jake finally seemed to understand that his comfortable lifestyle was about to implode. Only Melissa maintained her composure, probably already planning her exit strategy from a relationship that had suddenly lost its appeal. As we concluded the inspection back in the living room, Jennifer turned to me with professional courtesy. "Ms. Rodriguez, what would you like to do about the current tenancy situation?" I looked around the room at my family, the people who had kicked me out less than 24 hours ago, who had spent years treating me like a disappointing burden, who had charged me rent to live in my own house while failing to pay their own housing costs. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that the silence felt almost sacred. For the first time in my adult life, I held all the cards, made all the decisions, and controlled the outcome of a family crisis. "I'll need some time to consider my options," I said finally. "Can you prepare a full report with recommendations for addressing the lease violations and unpaid rent?" Of course. I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning. As Jennifer packed up her materials and prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Ms. Rodriguez, I want to commend you for handling this situation with such professionalism. Many new property owners would be tempted to act emotionally in circumstances like this. After she left, I stood in the living room of my house, looking at my family, and realized that the real test wasn't about property ownership or money or even revenge. It was about what kind of person I wanted to be when I finally had the power to hurt the people who had hurt me. The evening after the property inspection was the longest night of my adult life. I sat in my hotel room with Jennifer's preliminary report spread across the bed, calculating numbers that would determine my family's immediate future. The damage assessment was substantial: 3 months of unpaid rent, $4,500, property damage requiring professional repair, $8,200, lease violations that warranted immediate eviction, and a pattern of neglect that would make any responsible landlord terminate the tenancy immediately. But this wasn't just any tenancy situation. These were the people who raised me, who shaped my understanding of family and responsibility, who had just demonstrated exactly how little they valued our relationship when they thought they held the power. The question wasn't whether I could evict them, I clearly could. The question was whether I should, and what kind of person that decision would make me. My phone had been ringing constantly since Jennifer left. 17 missed calls from my mother, 12 from my father, 8 from Jake, and even 3 from Melissa, who apparently realized her comfortable living situation was in jeopardy. The voicemails ranged from panicked apologies to desperate pleas to angry accusations that I had somehow orchestrated this situation to hurt them. The most telling message came from my father at 11:47 p.m. "Emma, I know you're angry about yesterday, but this is too much. You can't destroy your family over a misunderstanding. We need to talk about this like reasonable adults. Call me back." A misunderstanding. 24 hours after evicting me from my own house, he was calling it a misunderstanding. The next morning, I called Jennifer to discuss my options before contacting my family. Given the circumstances, what would you recommend as a property owner? Honestly? Most landlords would begin eviction proceedings immediately. The unpaid rent alone justifies termination, and the property damage makes this a clear-cut case. But, she paused, I understand this is a unique family situation. If you're considering alternatives to eviction, we could structure a payment plan with strict conditions for addressing the violations. What would that look like? Full payment of outstanding rent within 7 days, immediate completion of all necessary repairs at tenant expense, removal of all commercial equipment and lease-violating items, and transition to a month-to-month lease with significantly higher security deposits. Plus, any future violations would result in immediate eviction without further notice. It was a tough but fair proposal, one that would test whether my family was genuinely committed to changing their behavior or just panicking about losing their housing. I decided to present their options in person, partly because they deserved to hear it directly from me, and partly because I wanted to see their faces when they realized the full scope of their situation. I arrived at my house, and it felt strange but empowering to think of it that way, at 10 a.m. on Thursday morning. This time, I didn't ring the doorbell. I used my spare key, the one I'd kept in my car for emergencies, and walked into the house I now legally owned. The family was assembled in the living room as if they'd been waiting for me, which they probably had. My parents sat stiffly on the couch, Jake was slumped in the recliner looking like he hadn't slept, and Melissa was conspicuously absent, probably having realized that dating someone who lived rent-free in his sister's house was less appealing than she'd initially thought. "Emma," my mother began immediately, "we need to discuss this situation rationally. There has to be some kind of mistake or misunderstanding." "There's no mistake, Mom," I interrupted, settling into the chair across from them with the confidence of someone who held all the power in the room. "Aunt Sophia bought this house 12 years ago when the previous owners faced foreclosure. You've been paying rent to her property management company ever since, except for the past 3 months when you stopped paying altogether. My father cleared his throat, attempting to regain some semblance of authority. Even if that's true, we've been living here for over a decade. We've maintained the property, improved it, made it our home. That has to count for something legally. Actually, Dad, you haven't maintained it. Yesterday's inspection documented extensive damage, safety violations, and neglect that puts you in breach of your lease agreement. As for improvements, renters don't build equity through improvements to someone else's property. That's basic real estate law. Jake finally spoke up, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Emma, what are you going to do? Are you really going to kick us out? It was a fair question, and one I'd been grappling with all night. That depends on whether you're genuinely sorry for how you treated me, or just sorry that your actions have consequences. Of course we're sorry, my mother said quickly. Yesterday was a mistake. We were under stress about finances and made a rash decision. We never meant to hurt you. You charged me $800 a month to live in my own house while you weren't even paying rent, I said, letting that sink in. You kicked me out with 4 hours' notice to make room for Jake's girlfriend. You spent 2 years treating me like a burden while I was literally subsidizing your housing costs. That wasn't stress, Mom. That was systematic disrespect. The silence stretched uncomfortably as they processed the full implications of their behavior. Finally, my father asked, "What do you want from us, Emma?" I pulled out Jennifer's report and set it on the coffee table. You have 2 options. Option 1, I begin eviction proceedings immediately based on unpaid rent and lease violations. You'll have 30 days to find new housing, assuming you can pass a credit check and afford first month's rent and security deposits elsewhere. Jake's face went white. What's option 2? Option 2, you acknowledge that your treatment of me was unacceptable and commit to rebuilding our family relationship on equal terms. You pay all outstanding rent within 7 days, complete all necessary property repairs at your own expense, and transition to a month-to-month lease with a substantial security deposit. Any future disrespect or lease violations result in immediate eviction. How much are the repairs? My father asked, scanning Jennifer's report. $8,200, plus the $4,500 in unpaid rent. So you need $12,700 within 7 days, plus ongoing monthly rent of $1,800. I'd decided to raise the rent to market rates, which were considerably higher than what Aunt Sophia had been charging. My mother looked stricken. Emma, we don't have that kind of money available immediately. Your father's business has been struggling, and Jake's investments. Jake's investments lost money, I cut her off. Just like his food truck, his cryptocurrency trading, and every other get-rich-quick scheme you've enabled. Meanwhile, you've been charging your daughter rent to live in her own house because you needed the income to avoid eviction. Jake stood up abruptly, pacing to the window with the kind of agitation that suggested he was finally grasping the reality of his situation. This is insane. Emma, you can't do this to family. We're your parents. I'm your brother. You're right, Jake. You are my family. Which is why I'm giving you an option to stay instead of just evicting you immediately like any other landlord would. But being family doesn't give you the right to treat me like garbage when you think you have power over me, then expect forgiveness when you realize you need my help. So what happens if we can't come up with the money? My mother asked quietly. Then you'll need to find somewhere else to live. I'll give you the standard 30 days notice, which is more generous than the 24 hours you gave me. The conversation continued for another hour, with my parents alternating between apologies, excuses, and attempts to negotiate better terms. Jake remained mostly silent, probably calculating whether he could move back in with friends or if Melissa's parents might take him in. The dynamic was completely different from any family discussion we'd ever had. For the first time, they were asking for my help instead of dismissing my contributions. Eventually, my father asked the question I'd been waiting for: if we agree to these terms and somehow come up with the money, what guarantee do we have that you won't just evict us anyway when you get tired of being our landlord? It was a legitimate concern, and one that got to the heart of what this was really about. Dad, I don't want to be your landlord. I want to be your daughter. But for that to happen, you need to start treating me like family instead of like hired help. No more lectures about financial responsibility from people who couldn't pay their own rent. No more golden child treatment for Jake while dismissing my achievements. No more making me feel like I have to earn my place in this family. My mother was crying now, probably realizing for the first time how their treatment had affected me over the years. Emma, we love you. We've always loved you. I know you love me, Mom. But love isn't enough if it doesn't come with respect. Jake has been unemployed for 2 years, lost thousands of dollars on failed ventures, and contributed nothing to this household, but you celebrate his potential and make excuses for his failures. I've been steadily employed, financially responsible, and helping support this family, but you treat me like a disappointment who needs constant correction. We just wanted you to be successful and independent, my father said weakly. I am successful and independent, Dad. I make more money than Jake ever has. I'd built a career in a competitive field, and I just inherited enough assets to never work again if I choose. The problem was never my success, the problem was that my success didn't look like what you wanted for me. By the time I left that afternoon, we had reached an agreement. My parents would have 7 days to secure the money for unpaid rent and repairs. Jake would remove all his commercial equipment and find legitimate employment within 30 days. The family would enter counseling together to address the communication and respect issues that had led to this crisis. And if they could meet these conditions, we would work on rebuilding our relationship as a family where everyone's contributions were valued. As I drove back to my hotel, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. I'd stood up for myself in a way I never had before, set boundaries that were long overdue, and given my family a chance to prove that they could change. Whether they would take that chance remained to be seen, but for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had some control over my place in the family dynamic. The real test would be whether they could come up with $12,700 in 7 days, and whether their apologies were genuine or just desperate attempts to avoid eviction. Either way, I was done being the family disappointment who quietly absorbed their disrespect. From now on, our relationship would be based on mutual respect, or it wouldn't exist at all. The next 6 days were a masterclass in family crisis management and creative problem solving. My parents, faced with the very real possibility of eviction, threw themselves into damage control with an energy I'd never seen from them before. Suddenly, the same people who had lectured me about financial responsibility were scrambling to secure a loan that would keep them housed. My father spent Tuesday and Wednesday calling every contact he had, trying to secure a short-term business loan or line of credit. The conversations I overheard during my daily check-ins were humbling for a man who had always prided himself on financial stability. Banks that had once courted his business were now skeptical of his ability to repay, especially when they learned the loan was to catch up on rent rather than invest in business growth. My mother took a different approach, contacting relatives she hadn't spoken to in years to ask for financial help. The conversations were awkward and revealing. Apparently, several family members had opinions about how the Rodriguez family had been living beyond their means for years. Aunt Carmen was particularly blunt. "Elena, I warned you about treating that house like you owned it when you clearly couldn't afford the payments." Jake's contribution to the crisis was the most interesting to watch. Faced with the collapse of his comfortable lifestyle and the very real possibility of homelessness, he did something I'd never seen before: he got a job. By Thursday morning, he was working at a local restaurant, taking whatever shifts they'd give him and talking about picking up additional part-time work. The cryptocurrency trading equipment was listed for sale online, and he'd swallowed his pride enough to ask former friends about employment opportunities. "Emma," he said during one of my visits, "I know I've been a terrible brother. I got comfortable letting mom and dad support me, and I took advantage of your contributions without appreciating what you were doing for the family." It was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from Jake, and it meant more than I'd expected. "I appreciate that, Jake. But apologizing is the easy part. The hard part is changing the behavior and proving you mean it." "I know. That's why I'm working 60 hours this week and selling everything I can. I want to contribute to fixing this mess instead of just being part of the problem." The most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Melissa, who I'd assumed would distance herself from Jake once his financial situation became clear, actually stepped up in a way that impressed everyone. She'd been quietly working at a high-end retail job that paid better than anyone realized, and she offered to contribute $2,000 toward the family's debt. "I know I haven't been part of this family very long," she told me privately on Friday, "but Jake is important to me, and I can see how much he's learning from this situation. If you're willing to give him another chance, I want to help make that possible." It was a mature response that made me reconsider my initial judgment of her. Maybe she wasn't just the shallow girlfriend I'd assumed. Maybe she was someone who saw potential in Jake that the rest of us had missed. By Saturday evening, they had assembled $11,200 through a combination of personal loans, sold possessions, Jake's new employment income, and Melissa's contribution. They were still $1,500 short, but my father approached me with a proposal that showed more humility than I'd ever seen from him. "Emma, we're $1,500 short of what we need. I'm asking if you'll accept a payment plan for the remaining amount, $500 per month for 3 months, added to our regular rent. I know we have no right to ask for your help after how we treated you, but I'm hoping you'll give us the chance to prove we can do better." It was a reasonable request, and one that showed they'd learned something about asking for help respectfully rather than demanding it as their due. "I'll accept that arrangement, Dad, with one condition. The family counseling starts immediately, not after you've caught up on payments. We need to address the communication issues that led to this crisis." Sunday morning, I met my family at the house with Jennifer Walsh to finalize the new lease agreement. The atmosphere was completely different from the eviction crisis just a week earlier. Everyone was dressed professionally, all the required paperwork was completed, and there was a sense of nervous hope rather than panicked desperation. "This is a fresh start for everyone," Jennifer explained as we signed the documents. "The lease violations have been addressed, the property damage will be repaired within 30 days, and we're transitioning to a month-to-month agreement with clear expectations for all parties." After Jennifer left, we sat around the kitchen table, the same table where I'd been served my eviction notice just 8 days earlier, and had our first family meeting as equals. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted, but more importantly, the communication pattern had changed. "I want to say something to all of you," I began, looking around the table at faces that showed genuine attention for the first time in years. This wasn't about money or property ownership or getting revenge. This was about respect and family dynamics and learning to value each other properly. My mother nodded, her eyes still red from the stress of the past week. "Emma, we failed you as parents. We got so caught up in our expectations and judgments that we forgot to appreciate who you actually are and what you contribute to this family. The worst part," my father added, "was that we were struggling financially while lecturing you about fiscal responsibility. We were living in a house we couldn't afford while charging our own daughter rent to subsidize our lifestyle. The hypocrisy is embarrassing." Jake had been quiet through most of the meeting, but he finally spoke up with more maturity than I'd ever heard from him. "Emma, I've been thinking about this all week, and I realize I've never actually thanked you for anything you've done for this family. You paid rent that helped keep us housed, you handled responsibilities around the house, you supported mom and dad in ways I never did, and I just took it for granted because it made my life easier. I also want to apologize for something specific," he continued. "When Mom and Dad told you to leave, I was excited about getting your room for my office. I didn't think about how cruel that was or how it would affect you. I was only thinking about my own convenience, and that's inexcusable." The conversation continued for over 2 hours, covering years of accumulated resentments, misunderstandings, and failed communications. For the first time in my adult life, my family listened to my perspective without dismissing it, acknowledged their mistakes without making excuses, and committed to specific changes in how we treated each other. The agreement we reached went beyond the rental arrangement. Jake would maintain steady employment and contribute fairly to household expenses. My parents would include me in family decisions and stop treating Jake's failures as learning experiences while treating my successes as lucky accidents. We would have monthly family meetings to address issues before they became crises. And everyone would attend counseling together to work on healthier communication patterns. Most importantly, we established that love and respect had to coexist in our family relationships. Being related didn't give anyone the right to treat others poorly, and financial dependence didn't justify accepting disrespectful treatment. As I left the house that evening, walking out the front door as a welcome family member rather than being evicted with a suitcase, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope for our family's future. The crisis had been painful, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes people don't realize how badly they're behaving until they face real consequences for their actions. The inheritance from Aunt Sophia had given me financial security and property ownership, but more importantly, it had given me the power to demand the respect I'd always deserved. And my family, faced with the reality of losing their home and their relationship with me, had chosen to do the hard work of changing rather than continuing to take my love for granted. It wasn't a complete transformation overnight, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I truly belonged in my own family. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the beautifully renovated home office of my house, yes, my house, writing this story and reflecting on how dramatically my life has changed since that Tuesday morning when my parents told me to pack my bags and leave my key on the counter. The room I'm in now used to be Jake's makeshift trading den, but it's been transformed into a professional space where I run my expanded digital marketing consultancy and manage my inherited real estate portfolio. The family dynamics have evolved in ways I never could have predicted when I first walked back into this house with Jennifer Walsh and her clipboard. My parents, humbled by the realization that they'd been living beyond their means while lecturing me about fiscal responsibility, have become genuinely supportive of my career and life choices. My father now regularly asks for my input on his business decisions, having learned that my financial acumen is considerably stronger than he'd assumed. My mother has stopped hinting about marriage and grandchildren, instead celebrating my professional achievements and introducing me to her friends as my successful daughter Emma. Jake's transformation has been the most remarkable to witness. The crisis that could have destroyed him instead became the wake-up call he needed to build a real life for himself. He's been steadily employed for 6 months now, working his way up from server to assistant manager at the restaurant, and he started taking business classes at the community college. The cryptocurrency trading equipment is long gone, replaced by textbooks and a genuine work ethic I'd never seen from him before. "You know what's weird?" he told me last month during one of our weekly coffee dates, a new tradition that's helped us rebuild our relationship. "I'm happier working 40 hours a week for someone else than I ever was sitting around trying to get rich quick. Having actual responsibilities and earning my own money feels better than all those years of depending on Mom and Dad." Melissa, who surprised everyone by sticking around through the family crisis, has become an unexpected ally in our family's healing process. She and Jake moved into their own apartment 4 months ago, but they still join us for family dinners every Sunday. Her perspective as an outsider who witnessed our dysfunction has been valuable in family therapy sessions, and she's helped Jake understand how his behavior affected everyone around him. The family counseling sessions have been challenging but transformative. Dr. Patricia Williams, our therapist, helped us identify patterns of communication that had been damaging our relationships for years. My parents learned to recognize how their golden child favoritism had hurt both Jake and me. Jake by preventing him from developing independence and resilience, and me by making me feel like I had to constantly prove my worth. The crisis with the house wasn't really about property ownership, Dr. Williams explained during one session. It was about power dynamics and respect within the family. Emma's inheritance gave her the leverage to demand the respect she'd always deserved, but the real work happened when everyone chose to address their behavior rather than just comply with new circumstances. The most meaningful change has been in how we handle disagreements and decisions as a family. The monthly family meetings we established have become a space where everyone's voice is heard and valued. When my parents were considering downsizing to a smaller rental property to save money, they asked for my input as both their daughter and their landlord. When Jake wanted to propose to Melissa, he talked through his financial planning with all of us to ensure he was ready for that responsibility. My relationship with money and success has also evolved significantly. The inheritance from Aunt Sophia gave me financial freedom I'd never imagined, but it also taught me that wealth without respect and healthy relationships is ultimately hollow. I could have used my newfound power to punish my family indefinitely, but choosing to offer them a path to redemption has been more satisfying than any revenge could have been. I've used my inheritance to expand my digital marketing business, taking on higher-profile clients and building a team of freelancers. The work is more fulfilling now because I'm choosing projects based on interest and impact rather than financial desperation. I've also started a small scholarship fund for students from working-class families who want to study business or marketing. A way to honor Aunt Sophia's belief in supporting people who demonstrate hard work and independence. The house itself has been transformed from a place of tension and hierarchy into a genuine family gathering space. We host birthday parties, holiday celebrations, and regular dinners where everyone contributes something and everyone's presence is appreciated. Jake and Melissa bring dessert, my parents handle the main course, and I provide the venue and wine. It's become the kind of family environment I'd always wanted but never thought possible. One of the most interesting developments has been reconnecting with extended family who had distanced themselves from my parents over the years. Aunt Carmen, who had been critical of my parents' financial management during the crisis, has become a regular visitor and valuable mentor. She shared stories about Aunt Sophia that helped me understand why I was chosen as the inheritance recipient. Sophia always said she was watching for the family member who would use success to lift others up rather than put others down, Aunt Carmen told me. She saw how you handled your parents' treatment with grace, how you worked hard without expecting special recognition, and how you maintained your integrity even when it would have been easier to become bitter. The property management company has been impressed with how smoothly the tenancy transition went after the initial crisis. Jennifer Walsh has become a friend and advisor, helping me understand the broader real estate portfolio I inherited and teaching me about responsible property ownership. She's also referred several other property owners to my digital marketing business, creating a professional network I never would have developed otherwise. Perhaps the most surprising outcome has been the improvement in my parents' marriage. The financial stress and family crisis forced them to communicate more honestly with each other and work together toward solutions. They've started attending their own couples counseling sessions and have rediscovered shared interests that had been buried under years of worry about money and children. We spent so many years focused on what we thought our children should be that we forgot to appreciate who they actually were, my mother reflected recently. The crisis taught us that we were failing as parents not because our children weren't meeting our expectations, but because our expectations were preventing us from seeing their actual strengths and contributions. My father has been equally introspective about his role in the family dynamics. I realize now that I was so worried about maintaining my position as the family patriarch that I couldn't acknowledge when Emma was actually more financially savvy than I was. My ego was more important to me than my daughter's feelings, and that's a terrible way to parent. The annual anniversary of my eviction, which we now jokingly call Independence Day, has become a family tradition for reflection and gratitude. This year, we spent the evening looking through photos from before and after the crisis, marveling at how much everyone has grown and changed. Jake looks healthier and more confident, my parents seem more relaxed and genuine, and I finally look like I belong in family pictures instead of like I'm trying to earn my place. Looking back, I realized that Aunt Sophia's inheritance wasn't just about money or property, it was about giving me the tools to transform my family's dysfunction into something healthier. The house ownership was the leverage I needed to demand respect, but the real inheritance was the confidence to know my own worth and refuse to accept less than I deserved. The lesson that stayed with me most strongly is that sometimes the people who love you need to face real consequences before they can learn to treat you well. My parents' love for me was never in question, but their respect for me had to be earned through crisis and consequence rather than given freely through understanding. As I finish writing this story, I can hear my family in the kitchen preparing Sunday dinner, a tradition that's become sacred to all of us. Jake is telling Melissa about his latest business class, my parents are debating wine selections, and everyone is contributing to a meal that will be shared with genuine appreciation for each other's presence. So here's my question for everyone who's made it through this entire journey with me. Have you ever had a relationship that needed to hit rock bottom before it could be rebuilt on a stronger foundation? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their disrespectful behavior, especially when that person is family. If this story of family transformation and finding your worth resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about setting boundaries and demanding respect. Share this with anyone who's ever felt undervalued by the people who should appreciate them most. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we deserve to be treated well by the people we love. Drop a comment and tell me about a time when you had to stand up for yourself with family or friends. What happened when you finally said enough was enough? I love hearing your stories of courage and self-respect, and I bet other viewers would find inspiration in your experiences too. Thank you for joining me on this wild ride from family disappointment to property owner to rebuilding relationships based on mutual respect. Remember, you teach people how to treat you, and sometimes the most powerful lesson you can teach is that your love and presence in their lives is a gift, not a guarantee. Here's to families that grow stronger through crisis, to inheritance that comes in many forms, and to never again accepting less than you deserve from the people who claim to love you. Life has a funny way of revealing who people really are when the power dynamics shift, and sometimes the best gift you can give yourself, and your family, is the courage to demand better.